Alright, so check this out. Something just went down with the team that I honestly didn't see coming, but it might actually be a bigger deal than it looks at first. This is one of those moves that doesn't get all the headlines right away. But when you really think about it, it could end up changing a lot more than people expect. I'll tell you everything in detail, but first click the like button and comment here what you think of this Seahawks draft. I want to know your opinion. The Seattle Seahawks made a move that caught a lot of people off guard, and it's one that could quietly reshape the identity of this offense moving forward. In a moment where Seattle wasn't even scheduled to be on the clock, John Schneider stepped in, picked up the phone, and struck a deal with the Cleveland Browns to move into the 5th round and select Iowa guard Bo Stevens, a player the organization clearly had circled as a priority target. This wasn't just a casual depth addition or a best player available situation that happened to fall into their lap. The Seahawks actively went and got him, and that detail matters. Seattle gave up a 2027 4th-round pick to make it happen, which at first glance might feel like a steep price considering the perceived strength of that future draft class. But internally, the Seahawks are operating with a very clear belief. Bo Stevens can help them now, not 2 or 3 years down the line. And when you dig into the player, you start to understand why the front office felt that urgency. Stevens comes in at 6'5½", around 315 pounds, built exactly like you'd expect from a classic Iowa offensive lineman. He plays with a physical edge that jumps off the tape immediately. This is not a finesse player. This is someone who wants to impose himself snap after snap, especially in the run game where his ability to engage linebackers and finish blocks stands out as one of his defining traits. There's also a level of versatility that makes him even more valuable to this roster. Stevens has experience lining up on both sides of the line, which gives Seattle flexibility as they continue shaping their offensive front. That kind of positional adaptability is something this coaching staff has clearly been prioritizing, especially when you consider other linemen on the roster with similar multi-position backgrounds. But let's talk about the real reason this move feels significant. The competition it creates immediately. The right guard spot is no longer something you can pencil in without a second thought. Anthony Bradford, along with other names in that interior rotation, now has legitimate pressure coming from a rookie who wasn't just drafted to develop quietly on the bench. Stevens is coming in with a real shot to take that job, or at the very least, push the entire group to a higher level. And that's where this decision reflects a broader philosophy from John Schneider and the Seahawks leadership. This is not a team content with past success. Even coming off a strong season, there were questions about whether Seattle would truly address the interior offensive line or simply trust the current group to take another step. Instead, they made it clear that good enough isn't the standard. They saw an opportunity to upgrade, and they took it. From an analytical standpoint, the value also lines up in Seattle's favor. Stevens was ranked significantly higher than where he was ultimately selected, meaning the Seahawks may have landed a player with a much higher ceiling than typical 5th-round expectations. Add in his strong PFF grades, his discipline in avoiding penalties, and the fact that he didn't allow sacks, and you're looking at a prospect who already brings a polished baseline into the league. Of course, he's not without flaws. There are concerns about elite athleticism and recovery when beaten, which could show up against faster, more explosive NFL defenders. But the counterbalance is his awareness, his hand power, and his football IQ. Those are traits that tend to translate well, especially in a system that knows how to maximize physical linemen who can execute in a zone-blocking scheme, which just so happens to be exactly what Seattle runs. And that scheme fit might be the most important piece of this entire puzzle. This isn't a case of forcing a player into a role that doesn't match his strengths. Stevens thrives in zone concepts, and the Seahawks lean heavily on that approach. When you combine scheme fit, physicality, and opportunity. You start to see a very real path for him to not only contribute early, but potentially lock down a starting role sooner rather than later. Looking at the bigger picture of Seattle's draft so far, there's a consistent pattern emerging. Each addition feels intentional, addressing specific needs while aligning with the team's identity. Whether it's improving the run game, adding turnover potential on defense, or building depth with high IQ players, the Seahawks are stacking pieces that complement each other. And now, with Bo Stevens in the mix, the offensive line, one of the most scrutinized units, gets a new layer of intrigue. Training camp just became a lot more competitive, and that's exactly what this team wants. Because if Stevens lives up to even part of the expectations that led Seattle to trade up for him, this could end up being one of those under-the-radar moves that pays off in a big way down the line. So now it comes down to you. After seeing the Seahawks trade up and invest in Bo Stevens to potentially reshape the interior offensive line, what's your reaction to this move, and how big of an impact do you think he'll have in his rookie season? And when you project that forward into what this offense could look like over the course of a full season, the implications get even more interesting. Because if Bo Stevens does win that right guard job, or even forces a rotation early on, you're not just adding another body to the line, you're potentially changing the attitude of the entire unit. This is a player who plays with an edge, who looks to finish blocks, who wants to put defenders into the ground, and that mentality can become contagious across an offensive front. Think about what that means for the run game specifically. Seattle has clearly committed to building around a zone-blocking identity, and that system depends heavily on timing, leverage, and physicality at the point of attack. Stevens already checks those boxes coming out of Iowa, where linemen are basically trained to execute that style at a high level from day one. So instead of a long developmental curve, you're looking at someone who can step in and understand the concepts right away, even if there are still adjustments to be made at the NFL level. And that brings us to another key detail that can't be ignored here. The Seahawks didn't just draft a need, they drafted a fit. There's a difference between plugging a hole and actually upgrading a system, and this feels much closer to the second scenario. When you hear evaluations talking about his awareness, his hand strength, and his ability to stay disciplined without drawing penalties, those are the exact traits that allow an offensive line to function cohesively, rather than just individually. At the same time, the competition aspect continues to loom large over this entire situation. Anthony Bradford isn't just going to hand over that job, and that's where this becomes one of the most important battles to watch as the off-season progresses into training camp. You've also got other depth pieces in that interior group, and suddenly, what might have looked like a settled position now becomes one of the most open and competitive spots on the roster. And that's exactly how good teams sustain success. They don't assume that last year's starters will automatically be good enough this year. They create internal pressure, they bring in players who can challenge for snaps, and they let performance dictate who ends up on the field. The Seahawks are clearly leaning into that philosophy, and this move is a perfect example of it. Now, zooming out one more level, you can start to see how this pick connects with everything else Seattle has done in this draft cycle. There's been a consistent emphasis on players with strong football IQ, players who fit specific roles within the scheme, and players who bring at least one standout trait that can translate immediately. Stevens brings multiple of those traits, and that's why this doesn't feel like a gamble as much as it feels like a calculated bet on a very specific type of player. There's also the long-term angle to consider. Even if Stevens doesn't dominate right away, the expectation internally seems to be that he can grow into a reliable starter. That development path, whether it's immediate or gradual, still leads to the same outcome: strengthening one of the most important units on the team. And if you've been following this team closely, you know the offensive line has been an area where consistency has been hard to come by at times. So bringing in someone who not only has the physical tools, but also the mental approach to improve over time, that's how you start to stabilize that group for years, not just weeks. And let's not forget the message this sends to the locker room. When a front office is willing to trade future assets to go get a player they believe in, it tells everyone inside that building that they're serious about competing right now. It reinforces the idea that every position matters, that every upgrade counts, and that no spot is safe if there's an opportunity to get better. That kind of mindset is what separates teams that stay competitive from teams that fall off after a good run. Seattle is clearly trying to build something sustainable here, and moves like this, ones that might not grab headlines immediately, are often the ones that end up making the biggest difference when the season is on the line. Now all eyes turn to how quickly Bo Stevens can translate what he showed in college to the NFL level. The physicality is there. The scheme fit is there. The opportunity is definitely there. The only question left is how fast it all comes together once he's on the field in a Seahawks uniform. And if it does come together quickly, don't be surprised if we're looking back at this trade-up as one of the smartest and most impactful decisions Seattle made in this entire draft. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, drop a like if you're excited about what Bo Stevens brings to this team, and click on the video that's on your screen right now, because if you want the latest Seahawks news and analysis the moment it happens, this is the place where you're going to find it first.